may sound counterintuitive, but commemoration is not an exercise in remembering better. It, as Guy Biner has told us, it's an exercise in forgetting. Commemoration works by removing all the complicated and contradictory aspects of the past to make a political point in the present. In this way, commemoration is always owned by one part of the community. It seldom, if ever, speaks to all of us at the same time, and almost always divides. That's the purpose of commemoration. And significantly, through commemoration, we learn little about the past. Yet back in 2010, the then Taoiseach Brian Cowan outlined the challenge and opportunity of the Decade of Centenaries. He outlined how an entwined narrative could emerge from the separate histories, British and Irish, Orange and Green, Republican, Nationalist, Unionist, and Loyalist. His vision was for the process of commemoration to recognise the totality of the history of the period and all the diversity that encompasses. For Cowan, commemoration could be shaped to serve the needs of reconciliation by putting the history back in and complicating the narrative. The scene was therefore set for the Decade of Centenaries on both parts of the island. Recognising the challenge of the decade, the Community Relations Council and the National Lottery Heritage Fund developed a set of principles for remembering to help shape a more constructive process of engaging with the past. It wasn't our desire to try and control the centenary events and how they would play out, but more to help encourage the context setting, which would help people understand more about the period, which was so formative in the establishment of the two jurisdictions on this island. So, over the last 12 years, we have seen the commemoration of the Ulster Covenant, the First World War, the Easter Rising, the establishment of the Northern Ireland state, and today, in 2022, we arrive at the anniversary of Partition. Broadly, the period has been successful. We've got through the period without conflict, and despite the odd controversy, we have learned more about what happened 100 years ago. And that's listening to Eamon really underlines that particular point. Our museums have run exhibitions, the media have printed articles and broadcast programmes, and community groups have engaged in exploration of their own local stories and connections to this period. What has been common to all is the recognition that to think about the past, a more plural understanding is necessitated. Exhibitions at the Ulster Museum have adopted the approach of multi-perspectivity, enabling them to tackle ever more contentious topics, bringing a depth of understanding to them. Belfast City Council, and David will speak more about this in a moment, Belfast City Council have reimagined City Hall to connect it more fully into the changed and plural demographics of Belfast. And despite the challenge of the flag protests, all was achieved through political agreements which were unimaginable a decade earlier. This has all been enabled and facilitated through the work of around the Decade of Centenaries. On reflection, the Decade of Centenaries may have been the easy bit. In our state of perpetual commemoration, we are now moving into the period of 50-year anniversaries of the Troubles, a period where we are faced with the challenge of lived experience. While we may have forgotten about the atrocities of the 1920s, as with the Altnavay and Weaver Street massacres, to name just two, we cannot afford as a society to go the same way with this more recent period. To do so would be to dehumanize us further as a society. If we cannot share each other's pain, who are we as people? The danger of defaulting to a form of equal opportunities mythologizing around commemoration gets us absolutely nowhere. And it's impossible to separate out the individual acts of loss which mark the last 50 years. Now more than ever, it is vital that we start to remember better and remember collectively. The critic Edna Longley once proposed the construction of a monument to our past, which we would then conveniently forget where it was put. However, the pain of the past cannot be so easily swept aside. I believe that the Decade of Centenaries has shown us how to remember better. Building on the principles for remembering, which put the facts of the past at their core, remembering better sets a number of tests. Are we remembering inclusively as opposed to selectively? And through the decade, what we have seen is attempts to bring other stories into the narrative, the stories of women. So, for example, in the First World War, it was seen at one point as solely being about men. Of course, it was not. And that's what we've been able to do and achieve. But also, there's a question: are we remembering inclusively as opposed to selectively? We shape our narratives to suit our own purpose. But is that an honest look at the past? We need to think inclusively. We need to identify the gaps and silences in the narratives that we are presenting. But also, what we should not be doing is privilege one narrative over another. There are certain narratives which are more based in evidence, and other narratives which are based on a mythic approach to the past. But also, in exploring the past, are we creating a simplistic equivalence between narratives? How do we bring all of this into balance? So, dealing with the past is not easy. The 20 plus years since the Good Friday Agreement has shown us that. But the Decade of Centenaries shows us that it can be done. It was the historian A.T.Q. Stewart who once said that to the Irish, all history is applied history, and the past is simply a convenient quarry which provides ammunition to use against the enemies in the present. So really my call is that maybe we should stop commemorating and remember better. But in reflection over the last 10 years, this isn't a call to stop the type of work that we've been doing. But I'm kind of pointing, I suppose, to the challenges of this next period that we are entering. And we did this work in the first instance because the Northern Ireland Executive itself did not take this on. Our divisions meant that the executive were not able to steer a path as they should have. Others had to take on that particular mantle, and that's what a lot of this work was about. So in terms of evaluating what has gone on, Eamon has shown you the reach of the work that has happened, how history has been brought to the fore. And one thing that's always struck me, particularly when you look at some of the controversies about commemoration, is the debate around them. So where last year there was in the Republic of Ireland, there was a great debate about the RIC and the Remembering the Blackened Hands. What that actually did, I thought the debate was a good thing, because it brought all that history out in front of people. It allowed us to complicate those particular narratives, show it is not straightforward. And that's the real value of this type of work. We've been able to show that difficult heritage can be tackled. There was a time when looking at the past was just seen as too difficult. We've been able to show through this period we can engage with the past. And given that one of the great unfinished challenges of the Good Friday Agreement has been our inability to deal politically with the past, again, I'd like to think that what a lot of the people who've been associated with the Decade Centenaries have shown, our museums, libraries, and communities, has shown that we actually can engage. It's just the politicians who need to be convinced of that. And what we've also endeavoured to do is widen the approach to the decade. We did not look at single events. We looked at a broad sweep of events. so they could be properly seen in their context. And that is one of the problems about when we come to sort of face into anniversaries in relation to the Troubles. It's when single events are seen to justify one particular side's narrative or the other. We've got to recognize, we've got to recognize the horrors that have happened. And if they happen to one part of the community, we need to recognize there were equal horrors that happened to the other. You cannot separate the Ballymurphy massacre from the likes of Bloody Friday. That's not how we can go about things. So, just in finishing, I'd like to say this work over the last decade has involved a whole range of different people, and we want to look at how this work can be taken forward and can influence what happens next.